As of June this year, Chief Twinn is also the Grand Chief of the Lesser Slave Lake Indian Regional Council. He has served in numerous other prominent positions for the last 20 years, from Sawridge First Nation Band Council to Councillor to President of the Sawridge Resource Development Corporation to Grand Chief of Treaty 8 First Nations of Alberta. He's also a member of the Lesser Slave Region Tri-Council, and Chief Twinn is married with 2 children. The second person that will be speaking on behalf of the Tri-Council is Reeve Murray Kerik. Murray began working as a logging contractor out of Grand Prairie and then moved to cattle ranching in Flatbush in 1986. He served for 12 years on the board of directors of the Alberta Beef Producers, where he was chairperson of the research committee. Murray then delved into municipal politics and now finds himself Reeve of the MD of Lesser Slave River. Municipal cooperation has become an area of importance to him, and he's an active member of the Lesser Slave Region Tri-Council. So I welcome the 2 of them to share their experiences in forming the Tri-Council with you here today. There's actually 2 mics if you want to both have one and wander, or you can do whatever you want with them. This one comes off if you want. I'll get out of your way here. Thank you, guys.
He says the old guy can start first. So, our other, we call ourselves the 3 amigos down there, and our other, or whatever you call them, our other partner, was unable to attend, so Tyler Warman, the mayor of Slave Lake, sends his regrets. He would have liked to have been here, and he is the best speaker. I'll do that, Cheryl. So, yeah, no, he's our better speaker, so you got the second team. But we've done this before, and you know, a little bit of history in our areas up there. We became MD, I believe, in 2000, right in around there. And we've never, other than what we had to do with the town, we've never dealt much with the other neighboring municipalities. We always just did our own business and fought back and forth over every nickel. And the First Nations, well, they've always been there, but we never had anything to do with them. And I knew what Roland looked like, but I didn't know, never talked to him. Then we had a little fire burn through our community. And, yeah, understatement. And then all of a sudden, there was all this provincial money offered to us for rebuilding, and I think we lost 5 doctors in one shot there. There had no home, so they were gone. And so here we didn't have hardly any health care left up there, and 450 homes gone in town and 50 in the MD. Sawridge was lucky, it just went around them, but not much. But I mean, they were affected. They were, you know, evacuated like everybody else. So here all of a sudden we have all this money that we have to figure out how to rebuild, and we have to work together. Oh, a new world. All of a sudden we're on the same side. And the nice part is it's turned into, we were forced into it. I think if we were to do it again, we'd have done it before we were forced into it, because not only is it working well for us, we've become friends. Discovered that a lot of, well, everything we do is the same, just in different limits. We started this Tri-Council. You've got a town of 7,000 or 8,000 people. You've got an MD with 3,000 people. You've got a First Nations with, you know, under 100 members. How do you make decisions? So this is the world that came for us, that worked for us, was we came up with a consensus system. Nobody had more veto power. Nobody had more say than anybody else. It was a consensus system. The question was never who's in favor. It's can you live with it? And sure, maybe it was better for the town or better for the MD or better for the First Nations and the rest of us. But it was never are you in favor of it. It's can you live with it? And that has set the whole basis for our so-called Tri-Council. And we've been 5 years now. And it's still growing. I mean, we're still learning. The room we have, I know we have more power lobbying with government. More, you know, it's just, it's opened up a new world for us. We get into, you know, what we're here for is with position acquisition. We work together now when we do have potential candidates looking at coming into the area. They come in, the MD, the town, the Sawridge, we all work together to welcome to the area. We give them helicopter flights around, you know, show them how nice it is, and the spirit of cooperation, which they probably don't get that anywhere else. You know, it's just the way we all get along is a new world to most people. And I know, you wait until Roland starts, he'll give you a little more of the history. We have, to work with a city and a municipal district is easy. When you roll the First Nations in with it, there's a whole new set of constraints that come in there. And I'll just turn it over to Roland on this one. He knows.
Thank you, Murray. Constraints. One of the first things that we learned as a tri-council was when we went there and listened to understand what our differences were and discovered they're not all that different. Albeit maybe from a different perspective, maybe from different funding levels. But when it comes to the healthcare, the First Nation being so small does not qualify for a healthcare center. So our membership has to go across the street, literally across the street to the town to get their services. So when the town lost 5 doctors, right immediately before and during the fires, that's a great concern for everybody. Now we have 10, 12,000 people looking for health care from 2 doctors. So the danger is we're going to burn them out. And then we met with the province. They said, "What? We're throwing this money in. We're going to help you out. What is something different? What can we do differently here? Because we can't go out and actively recruit doctors for Slave Lake. That's not how it works. We have to bring the doctors in, and then we tour them around to different areas, and they select where they go. And then how do you get the immediate needs looked after? And that's when the Premier sat down with us and was talking about this family care clinic, a new concept. More designed for the larger centers like the Edmontons, the Calgarys, Grand Prairies, for McMurray's. But it seemed like something that would work for us because in this new way of doing business in the healthcare system, we were now going to have some nurse practitioners that could take some of that heavy load off of the doctors, which we didn't have enough of. So we sat down and we discussed this as a tri-council and decided, let's give it a shot. What's the worst thing that could happen? That we'll be back to where we are with just 2 doctors and no support? So we lobbied. We got that up and running. We were able to work as a facilitator with the doctors in the area that own the private clinic to be able to get the province to purchase the clinic and then turn it into a family care clinic that eventually moves over to the new hospital. Another thing that we've been able to deal with is when we did the development of our consensus model. It's not a true consensus in the sense that we all have to agree. As Murray said, the question is, can I live with that? Yes, that's a better deal for the town, but it doesn't hurt me. It doesn't hurt the membership, so I can live with it. I just won't vote against it. Things start to move forward. And then through a lot of discussions, we started to talk about our differences and the misconceptions that are out there. I know there's a lot of misconception about the treaty rights of First Nations people under health care. Everything you get is free, fully covered, paid for, don't worry about it. Maybe in 1969, when everything was cheap and there were so few First Nation members, but everything changed after 1985 when they made the Indian Act amendments and tripled the amount of treaty Indians needing these services. So the demand went up, funding stayed the same. We've been under a 2% cap for funding since 1989, yet our population is growing. A lot of the misconceptions are, as an example, is in transportation. Some of the people within the town, the MD, see these medical transportation buses traveling from Big Stone up north of us, Drift Pile to the west, Sucker Creek, transporting people from there to the specialists in Edmonton. And they think, oh, that's such a great thing. You guys do such a great thing. Why can't we have that for our members? Our citizens. Well, the funny part is you can, but nobody understands how medical transportation works from the general public. If your income level is below a certain amount, you can access transportation dollars to get to and from. Most people don't realize when you apply, you can get like 36 cents a kilometer to get yourself to your specialist in Edmonton. There's a process. That exact same process is available to the First Nations. But the funding level is a little lower. We've got a raise in our medical transportation dollars. We now are going to be able to collect 12 cents a kilometer. Up until last year it was 11 cents. So by necessity, the First Nations that have their own health programs were being told by their membership, I can't get to Edmonton and back on 11 cents a kilometer. That's covering my fuel, maybe. So instead of giving the individual, here's your 11 cents a kilometer, they pool the money, bought a medical transportation van through their health centers, coordinate the appointments so that they can bring 12 people to Edmonton at once. Now they're getting $1.50 a kilometer and can afford the bus. But that's out of necessity. It wasn't a great idea. It's just the only way it could happen. We also got to know that we have housing issues. Everybody knows about the housing issues on First Nations. But we as a First Nation didn't realize the town, the MD, also have housing issues. But not in the same sense that there's not enough. It's just not affordable for the people that don't work for the oil companies. So we started to look at collaboration. How do we work with that? How do we continue to get these services? Because like any other entity, we have some businesses too. We rely on labor, the lower end minimum wage labor. We can't get them to come up to Slave Lake and work in a truck stop if their housing cost is $1,500 a month. So now we're in the same boat saying, well, how do we do this? So we got together and we've been working with the town and the MD and looking at trying to develop some more affordable housing. The one thing that's kind of saved us a little bit, the price of oil dropped to 40 bucks a barrel. But that was just, we can't count on that all the time. We also got to know that through working together, some of this funding that we didn't realize is not always available to each other. Prime example was FireSmart. We put together a FireSmart plan for the town, the hamlets in the MD, and the Sawridge First Nation. The MD was kind of shocked to find out the province couldn't give the First Nation money for FireSmart because of this jurisdictional, federal, provincial. But lo and behold, the MD stood up and said, you know what? I'll apply for the FireSmart on your behalf. Great, I thought, right on. It's nice. The biggest shock for me was at the end of the day, I said to, I think it was Alan Winarski is the administrator. I said, well, okay, so what kind of report do you need from me now that you gave me $500,000 for FireSmart? I need a letter saying you got the money. And I'm like, say that again? You need a letter saying you gave me the check. Man, that's different. As a First Nation, under federal government funding, I would have had to written 3 reports on that money. The red tape that First Nations are involved in. If First Nations were to take advantage of every federal program that's available to them, we have to put in 127 reports. That is a report every day and a half. It's just unbelievable. But once we got to know these kind of things things have changed. The relationship changed. We're more cooperative. Like I say, it's just amazing when we said, well, the MD will step up for us. Well, great. But it's not always a one-way street. In the Economic Development Committee that we now sit together, because we're all involved with the economic development, First Nation was able to go to Indigenous Relations in Alberta, get a grant for these cooperative initiatives, and we were able to bring in $25,000 to hire somebody to start moving on some of our economic development activities. We need to diversify our economy. We're too heavy in oil and gas. The biggest hurdle, I think, at the beginning was starting the conversation. So many times it's, well, you're federal, we're provincial, we'll do our own thing. You'll do your own thing. Water. Here's an issue. We get our water from the town. However, our water quality is monitored under federal standards, the town under provincial standards. Every now and again, we get a nice little letter from Health Canada that says, your water's substandard. However, we're not going to do anything because you get it from the town, and the provincial standards say it's okay. Uh-oh. What's this? We have higher standards as Indians? Holy cow, that doesn't make sense. Now you look at things like the Safe Drinking Water Act that they passed a few years back for First Nations. To me, that's a farce. They turn around and say, okay, you know what? We want every member on your reserve to have safe drinking water, and we're going to make it the responsibility of chief and council. Somebody dies, we're going to sue your butt, and you're going to be in trouble. But we can't give you any funds to make sure you have safe drinking water. Oh, that's great. And once we made this known at the town has changed now their system for treating water, and lo and behold, they're in federal standards. How nice. That would have never happened if we weren't talking. If I hadn't said to the mayor, you know what? Here's a report. Look, it's not good enough for the Indians, but for some reason it's good enough for you Albertans. I just love that. But anyways, the conversation is difficult at the start. It is. And when we started with the Tri-Council, we go back to the consensus model, it was recognized right off the bat. This isn't going to be fair if we're going to vote on everything. The town has 8 votes, the MD had 6 or 7, and we had 3. So we weren't very hopeful that we were going to get anything out of this. But after the consensus building model was developed, and after a lot of discussions, the comfort level changed. We got to recognize. We even build relationships. We now go on a canoe trip, the mayor, the Reeve, and I. It's kind of funny. It's almost a joke. You know, people think it is when you first tell them. On our first trip, we went down Lesser Slave River and went by the pulp mill's discharge. And the water was red and had floaties in it. And it was like, oh, this is strange. I don't think this is right. So Murray calls up the pulp mill or the environment minister and says, there's a problem over here. Well, how'd you guys discover? Well, the mayor and the chief and I went on a canoe trip. And he's like, and the punchline is, no, seriously, we got in a canoe and we paddled down the river. Well, this year we went again. We went by the same area. The water's not red. There's no floaties in it. And I'm thinking, geez, I wonder, did they hear we're going back on a canoe trip and they just turned it off? I don't think so. They probably did they figured out what it was. There was an anomaly, but these are some of the things that we can grow out of this cooperation and get rid of that fear of, oh, I don't know if I should talk to them. There could be a problem here. Well, that in itself is the problem. It's to take that bold step. And I hope it doesn't take a fire or a flood for other jurisdictions to move into that direction. Because at the end of the day, the benefits far outweigh the potential conflicts. So thank you for that, and I'll turn it over to Murray. And if anybody has questions, please jump in at any time. We don't have a PowerPoint. We'd much rather just answer any questions.
Okay, so in this process of getting to know each other, and that's really what it was for the three of us. I mean, the town and us as MD, we've had intermunicipal agreements on rec facilities and trail developments and whatnot for years, and of course it was always just a fight, but we never developed a real close relationship to where you actually trusted the people you're dealing with. And we've got to the point now, we signed a friendship accord where we agreed to do everything, you know, above board with respect and everything else to each other, you know, and I mean, that might not sound much to you, but it means a lot to the three of us, and we proudly have these great big framed accords in our offices, and I mean, it means something to us. It actually, it shows the spirit of how we actually committed to this working together. And you have to commit. I mean, you can't say you're going to work with the First Nations and not be true to your word, because if you are, you're done. That's right. That's before you even start, you're finished. You have to have that commitment. And I think, like, we've been long enough now, we know each other so well, we're pretty blunt with each other. I sure hope nobody ever listens to us, but because especially if we have a few beer, then it really gets good. But I mean, but the spirit is there. Everything we look at, first off, we gave up no autonomy. You know, as the MD, we run our MD. As First Nations, Roland runs his First Nations. As the town, Warman runs his town. We don't step on each other's toes. We have interdevelopment agreements around the fringe areas, around all of us, where we're all kind of in on the same thing. Some growing pains there. We stuck it to the town once, and the town stuck it to the First Nation, so Roland has one coming. But but it's growing pains. I mean, we have to learn these things, and that's where our problems come in, was just learning. And because it's a new way of doing business out there. And I think probably the biggest thing we found is that when we talk as a voice, as a tri-council, we get answers. Whereas before, well, you got that generic form letter, and 3 months after you sent a letter in asking for a question. Now we get attention. We get it fairly quick. Maybe it doesn't help having the Minister of Municipal Affairs in our town too, but but I mean, it's worked well for us, and I know the government seem to be pushing this regional cooperation more and more and more. They talk about all our funding that's coming down. It's going to be tied to regional cooperation. We're lucky we're 5 years ahead of everybody else. And if you've got any First Nations in your communities, I would really push, you know, to get them involved, get talking to them. That's the first step, is start talking to them and find out. You'll find out more and more and more how things come together. That's one thing I really appreciated with Roland. We sat down when we were first putting together, we worked with CD and Candu. Candu is a Canadian Aboriginal, what does it stand for? Yeah. It's federal government anyway, and it's Aboriginal development and whatnot. And they sat down and they actually paid for some facilitation to get the three of us to know each other. And Roland got up and he started talking about their history. Well, I'll tell you, it's just awe-inspiring. It goes back so far, and I don't think he forgets anything. He remembers everything. I enjoyed it in Nanaimo. Roland got up and told him that he was the son of the first chief of the Sawridge First Nations, and when it was my turn, I got up and said, I'm the son of the first Reeve of the MD of Lesser Slave River. So, so we have something in common. But that's what I would really encourage, is if you get a chance to work with the First Nations, you have to understand them. Like, we've even gone to where Roland's given us some courses in Native consultation, because we don't understand it. It just makes us mad. Well, it doesn't make us mad now. Now we kind of understand how it works. But before, we didn't know. And so a lot of the mistrust between each other is just the fact there was no communications. We didn't know. And now that we know, they're not so bad after all. So, but other than that, is there any questions that anybody has? Go ahead, ma'am. Yeah, we'd be down to the two amigos. So, nope.
How it really solidified was one of my council members at the time, Roland Twinn, had sent an email to myself and to the mayor and the Reeve and said, there's this can-do. that has a CD program. So CANDO is the Canadian Association of Municipal. That was CANDO, and then that. But this is underneath the FCM, the Federal. Exactly. And with that, we were able to access some dollars and bring in a facilitator to have some of these hard discussions. And then with that, we also were then able to access a few more dollars for some other initiatives to start the Economic Development Committee of the Tri-Council. So by bringing some of these things in place, being able to have that open discussion, you know, we set up our ground rules. You know, we're going to be blunt, we're going to be honest, but we're not going to take this stuff personally. And that's the hardest thing to start with, is to say, I'm an elected official, I've got to deal with this, and if one of the council members on one of the other councils doesn't understand First Nation consultation, why it's important, where it come from, so be it. It's not an insult to me personally. In fact, I should be thinking, well, geez, maybe you need an education too, because in this country, I can't say what it's like today. I'm a little long in the tooth to go to school, but back when I went to school, they didn't teach anything in school about First Nations, or back in the day, Indian bands under the Indian Act, and what this really means. Today, with giving a little bit of background, a little bit of history, some people are starting to go, because consultation requirements have always been there. They've never been enforced until a court case in BC under the Taku First Nation and the Haida First Nations. That is when the Supreme Courts of this country said, no, mere engagement, just notification, is not consultation with First Nations because of our rights under our treaties and under our Aboriginal title. So that's where a lot of misunderstanding is. Some people thought, oh, it's just the Indians pushing hard. No, it was the federal courts, the provincial courts that said this, and we've just adapted. A lot of people still don't know what a treaty is and why it come about. People still talk about them as peace treaties. Yeah, they are in the wording to keep peace and order. But as we were taught from our elders, we have treaties of sharing. Before Canada could expand out of what is now Ontario and Quebec, they needed to have a treaty, an agreement with the First Nations, because we still had title. And that's where it all bears from. So I was able to give a few PowerPoint presentations at Tri-Council. There's been a shift in the understanding. Not with everybody, but then again, some are better than none. And with that, now we can talk about why consultation has to happen and what it's for. You know, it's might sound insulting that our consultation rights have a higher level than, say, a municipality, but the treaty makes that happen because of the promises to live our lives as we always have, to hunt, fish, and trap. So we have a responsibility on our end to protect the environment and our customs and traditions that give us a definition of why we are Indians and not the average Canadian. And that in itself is why we do what we do. Because for us to continue to have treaty rights, there has to be animals. And that's why when it comes to resource development, we're pretty stickler about what are you doing? Why do you have to go through here? What can you do to mitigate these problems? Can you move your line over so you're not disturbing these sacred plants that we use for medicinal purposes? Things like that. And I've seen a lot of eyes open up at these presentations. And again, the relationship is ever evolving, and it's becoming more trustworthy, trustful with each other, and more respectful. And that in itself is a win. Not including all the other things like the Legacy Center that's now in the town of Slave Lake. because of our cooperation, working with CAP, working with the province, we have a legacy center that houses a theater now that we never had for the arts in the town. We have an upgraded daycare. The daycare facility in the town of Slave Lake was an old curling rink built in the 1960s. Inadequate, too small. Got one of the top of the line daycares now that members from the 3 jurisdictions all can enjoy. So there's so many things that have changed in that it would take us all day to explain everything, but it's well worth it.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. We actually have what would you call it? It's orientation deal with our new councils. We'll never have 3 complete changes because the First Nations are 2 years out from us. They're also on a 4-year rotation, but they're 2 years off from ours, so at least we don't have all 3 jurisdictions changing at the same time. But that's part of our new council orientation, is we spend a whole day with a history of what's happened, why, and what the future projection is. No, our goal as the 3 of us leaders is to try and make sure that this goes on forever. So as long as there isn't a radical change in our councils over the next few years, it's getting firmly entrenched in the way we do business. So hopefully it maintains.
So from my perspective, I think this is fantastic. Approval process is absolutely. Sawridge First Nation has been known as a successful First Nation, a lot of money, don't need help. We never get government grants. However, as I said earlier, through Indigenous relations, we were able to get a $25,000 grant to work with the Tri-Council. The entities are looking at us a little differently now. They're seeing a success. And every government is always looking for a success story. How can we hold up our little story, say, we are a good government? And this is one of them. And it's recognized across the board. Even with the First Nations, you wouldn't believe how many First Nations have come to me and says, how do we start a Tri-Council? What are the benefits? I've been approached from the chief of Horse Lake. I've been approached from the chief of up in Tall Creek. I've been approached by several chiefs saying, that's novel. How does it work? How can we get it started? Because we think there's some problems there's some issues that are happening outside of the reserve that are affecting us. We'd like to have a say. So it's a movement. It's slowly moving forward. And if you look at, as Murray was saying, the Municipal Act review, they're going toward these more regional things. So I think it's getting traction. And as far as longevity, I think our own people are starting to understand the Tri-Council. There's more interest. Now when there's an issue, as an example, in medical transportation, one of the seniors from the town of Slave Lake, through a person, contacted me to say, we need to talk about some sort of medical transportation for the seniors in Slave Lake to get to Edmonton for their specialists because the Greyhound bus no longer has passenger service. And it's, how can you get us on the Tri-Council agenda? We'd like to talk to them. So like I say, I believe that the proof is in the pudding, and I think the longevity is going to happen. The good thing with the First Nation, with this group here, is that we're small, and our leadership tends to have longevity. I'm the 7th chief of Sawridge since 1899. We tend to hold our positions, like I've been here since 2003. I've been on council since 1997. So that is in itself help, but it doesn't mean it can't work with other First Nations. Because once you get that proof in the pudding, you get some benefits from each side, they're going to want to be there. My understanding is during this review, they are looking at making some changes to encourage collaboration regionally. They're not necessarily speaking of First Nations, but at the same time, when you look at what we've done, we are kind of the model of how it should work. Because if you want to continue down where municipalities deal on a voting system. You're setting up the conflict. So this is where, if the municipalities decide that when they're getting together of the different sizes, different size councils, you adopt a consensus model, it makes a shift in everything. And that's what they're looking for, is a better bang for their buck. Instead of having 3 municipalities in one area fighting for the same program and funding, and there's not enough there, instead of taking the pie and breaking it into 3, they might even have to just break it into 2 or give the whole thing to a region. So with that, if you're set up for it, you're going to be first at the trough when these come down, when these changes come down the pipe.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say, and on top of that, you'll find there's going to be something coming down federally. I was in Niagara Falls with FCM here a couple of years ago, speaking on the same issue because they wanted to know how it worked too. So it's a collaboration between municipalities and First Nations. And you and I spoke in Nanaimo 2 years ago? Year and a half. We've done this show before. But it's, and it's the same thing. I mean, the government interest in this, they're really pushing it. And of course, that's why we get trotted out to all these little shows, because they like to show people that it can work. And it does. I mean, we're prouder than hell of ourselves. So.
And it also allows you to stack government money that you're not supposed to stack. Right? So the town, the MD, apply provincially. I can apply federally. And I also can apply provincially, because they have Indigenous Relations in Alberta, and I have Indigenous Northern Affairs Canada rolling out their programs. And some of those programs are for collaboration, and they all want to see some skin in the game. Nobody wants to be the 100% funder. But if you could say, well, here's 25% from the federal, here's another 50% from the provincial, and 25% from the municipalities, they're happy. It's like, okay, I'm getting bang for my buck. I'm not wasting money. That's the advantages of working together. You can technically stack it because you're not stacking it as one entity.
Maybe one more question, and then just a reminder that we will have an opportunity for further conversation with both Murray and Chief Twinn in our next round. So is there one more question I'd like to ask right now? Okay. I want to thank you both very much for coming down and sharing with us, and we'll just move you to the next round. But first, I'd like to give you each a gift from a local potter in town as a gift of appreciation for taking time to be with us today.